For adulting today, we are talking about inclusion. Inclusion is a word that I never said before. Let's say, 2 years ago? Now it's all anybody says. I love the principles of inclusion, which is that everyone has a point of view, diversity of thoughts and ideas, perspectives, backgrounds, sexualities, orientations, identifications. All that stuff is great. The net of it, though, is, and Stephanie talked about this when we had HR Stephanie on the pod way back, but being inclusive in the workplace can make people most comfortable. It can create the highest performing teams, and it can create a culture where people are supportive and encouraging of one another instead of being divisive and negative towards one another. We spoke with the researcher who looked into this. His name is Paolo Gaudiano. He is an adjunct professor at NYU's Stern School of Business.
I think a lot of people talk about diversity and inclusion, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. But if you look at the reality, almost everybody focuses only on diversity. All the data we look at is diversity, and all the targets people set have to do with diversity. And we have research and actually data that shows that, in fact, inclusion is extremely important, because inclusion is what makes you feel that you want to get up and go to work every day. And if you go to work and you feel excluded, frankly, you're not going to be happy, you're not going to be productive, which means that the company is going to suffer, and then you're going to leave, which is going to cost the company. So we believe that inclusion is actually the more important element. You need to be inclusive in order to have a more diverse environment, in order to sustain that diversity, and in order to have both satisfaction of your individuals and performance of the company.
He says that it's easy to blame corporate culture for their lack of D&I efforts.
Corporate culture is not like some monster that lives in a nest that comes down and bites people when things happen. It's really what we look at overall when we say, well, these groups of people are not feeling very included, but it boils down to behaviors. And so for us, what we came to realize is that the thing that matters the most is how we behave with everybody around us. Whether it's little things that we say that we don't necessarily mean to offend other people, what we do, and or things that we do that are potentially going to give benefits to one group of people instead of another. All of those kinds of things are what really matter. So it's really all about individual behaviors, which means that whether you are the CEO of a company or a part-time, cleaning staff, you can have the opportunity to influence people's experiences in a positive or negative way.
What he talks about is that it's easy to blame corporate culture for a lack of D&I efforts. In a lot of ways, D&I efforts are good team building efforts. And there's ways that companies can be most successful by incorporating training and by incorporating D&I.
Well, clearly, depending on your level within the organization, the behaviors may have a much broader impact. So if you're part of the leadership and you set a policy that is, let's say, unfavorable to women, then of course that's going to have a very negative impact. But even at the individual level, it's things like make sure that when you are organizing a meeting, that you invite everybody that should be in that meeting. Make sure that if you're in the meeting, even if you're not one of the organizers, and I know this is something that we guys tend to have more of a tendency to do, is to kind of interrupt and jump in and be very excited about our own ideas. And sometimes it's good to sit back and let other people speak, and make sure that if you witness somebody doing something that you think is not very inclusive. For example, a woman or a person of color in a meeting says something and they get ignored, and then somebody else repeats it later and they get all the credit to say, hey, that's great. That's exactly what Jane said 10 minutes ago, or whatever the case might be. So it's really all about making sure that you first of all, actively don't do anything that might upset people. Like, one of the things that a lot of people of color complain about is having to essentially hide their identities. And when people do things like tell jokes that are inappropriate, or ask people about their clothing, or make comments about clothing or hair and things of that sort, even little things like that can be very offensive to people. But it's more about just creating an environment where you're not inadvertently or purposefully creating discomfort for other people.